Welcome to First Unitarian.
We gather on Sundays to celebrate life, to witness to truth, and to be with each other in life's challenges and joys.
All week long, we're building a community, one connection and one person at a time. We care for each other and our children, we grow our souls, and we transform our world.
We're glad you're here.
Welcome home.
Day. It was a couple days ago, yeah, but that doesn't mean we can't keep celebrating. Happy Earth Day. Happy Earth Day. That's a little better. I invite you now to rise in voice, body, or spirit and join me in singing Morning Has Broken. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day. Please be seated.
What a wonderful thing it is to sing with all of you, especially those folks online. I am so grateful you are singing so loudly that I can hear you. And if you're not, you'll get another chance to do it later in the service. Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Rochester. I never know when I'm mic'd. I'm just naturally loud. So it's my natural state. In any case, welcome to Sunday morning at First Unitarian. Here, our mission is through spiritual connection in community. We listen deeply to others and ourselves. We open to wonder and transformation, and we serve together with love and humility. It is a good day to be together. We're celebrating Earth Day. We are celebrating being together. Hopefully some of you brought your bikes, because I see that the bike mechanics aren't in here, so they're probably busy out there. We want to make sure that you're all safe and ready for a summer of riding, of fresh air, and we're also learning new skills, learning to use the tools available to us, leaning into new ways of being. It is a thing that we practice again and again here. And if you're new or newish, we want to help you get connected here in this community. I invite you to stop by the welcome desk or connect online after the service. If you've been coming here for 4 minutes or maybe 4 Sundays and you'd like to know a little bit more about these people you keep spending Sunday morning with, Shannon Foose, our membership coordinator, is leading UU 101 after the service, both here in person in the Susan B. Anthony Lounge, as well as online. We gather here on the ancestral and contemporary land of the Seneca people, the keepers of the western door of the Haudenosaunee. And we gather physically here in person as well as online from all over. So if you're joining us online outside of the Rochester area, I'd invite you to name in the chat the indigenous people of the land that you find yourself on. If you are online and that chat prompt isn't something that you had to do because you're here in Rochester or in this area, I invite you simply to say hello And if you're here in person, I invite you to look around and find someone to give an air high five to. It goes like this. And if you want to get fancy, you can snap at the end. It is with such good humor that I see you all humoring me, giving long-range air high fives, and some of you even giving contact and consentful high fives. It is good to be in community together. I'm the Reverend Sherry Halliday Kwan. I'm the lead minister of this congregation. I serve with my colleague, Reverend AJ, and leading worship with us today, we've got Tommy and the First Unitarian Choir. Sue Morgan and Aaliyah Katwana are helping us lead worship. We've got video from musicians and speakers from other Unitarian Universalist communities around the country. We've got a whole host of people that make worship happen both in person and online. And every Sunday morning takes all of us. And so I invite you to join me in our unison words as we light our chalice together. Sue Morgan will physically light our chalice here. And if you are online, I invite you to light a chalice wherever you are. May the flame we now kindle inspire us to use our power to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy, and to seek liberation in the fullness of community.
Things for me today, sorry. When I was 13, I ran away from home. I wanted an adventure. I set out for what turned out to be an almost 40-mile bike trip to return to my summer camp where I had fallen in love with my counselor, Kimberly. The thought of seeing Kimberly again just kept me pedaling even when my legs felt like jelly, up and down the Bristol hills and along country roads with only the vaguest idea where I was going. But finally, after wrong turns and almost 6 hours of pedaling, I arrived at the camp just as it was getting dark. I cycled down that dirt road. It was empty. Camp was closed for the season. In the note I had left with my little brother to give my parents when they noticed I was gone, I had said for my mom and dad not to worry, I was fine. I was not fine. I was cold and hungry and tired and feeling more than a little foolish. I was terrified at the thought of spending a night alone in the woods, and I was ready for my adventure to be over. I just wanted to go home. Luckily for me, the caretaker's cottage had a light on. So I walked down to it with my bike, and the two women who opened the door were more than a little surprised to see a leftover camper on their doorstep. But they welcomed me in, they gave me hot chocolate, and they called my father. While I sat there and waited for my father to arrive, I looked around the house and thought about how cozy and nice it was, just contained just right for two people. They had their guitars and their fireplace and their dog. And that's when it struck me, no husbands. The two of them lived there in their lovely cabin in the woods, without any men. I'm sure that in Penyan in the early 1980s, there were lesbians, but they existed only in rumor form. I didn't actually know any women who didn't live without husbands. I thought that's what you had to do. So my father arrived, and on the way home, I prepared myself for the mother of all tongue lashings, which I knew I richly deserved. But he just said, "Your mother and I, we're so worried about you," and that's all. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, and I was sorry. I was sorry I had given them so much anxiety. I was sorry I had put myself in so much danger. I was sorry I had involved my little brother. But I couldn't be entirely sorry, because now I knew something I hadn't known before. Seeing the caretakers gave me a new vision for how my future could be. I could live in the woods, in a little cabin, with a dog and a fireplace and another woman. As it happens, I live in the city with no dog and no fireplace and 2 cats and 9 chickens and 2 kids and a wonderful woman. So I think that's why we come to church. I think because sometimes we have to see the possibilities in order to envision a future that works for us. We also come because it's Lesbian Visibility Day, a day that helped widen the gay liberation movement and reminds us that as Unitarian Universalists, we are striving to ever widen the circle.
Oops. Good morning. My name is Aaliyah Kitwana, and we're going to do an embodiment practice today, like really brief in honor of Earth Day. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, if you feel comfortable, is to take off your shoes. One shoe. Take the second shoe off. And even from where you sit, and if you kept your shoes on or not, feel the earth beneath you and allow it to support you. Take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Now, in body or spirit, please stand. And continue to allow the earth to hold you. It does that without us asking. That's gravity. And your bowl to help you stay erect. One of the things that I admire most in nature are trees. I admire that they have very deep roots. They establish their root system far before, or long before they start getting big, right? They have all these fibers and, I don't know, cellulose stuff that helps them to stay strong and straight and erect. So I'd like you to embody that sense of dignity and strength in your posture as well, and still feel the earth hold you as if you have your own root system in place. Another thing about trees that I admire, and I tell my daughters that are trees talk to us, is that when the wind blows, they sway, right? So they kind of like, so you can spread out for this if you don't want to hit your neighbor. But like, let's just pretend there's a wind blowing and we're swaying. And maybe we have a message for some little girl looking out the window, watching the wind blow the trees and dance. In this time of year, it's kind of like our windy season in Rochester, right? We almost always have a tree fall on our property. And that is typically because they're either sick or they're inflexible. So if you stand still while the wind is blowing and things are changing for you, there's a chance you might get blown over and fall and become a different part of our ecosystem. So the message and the embodiment for today is to remain flexible and flow with the wind. Thank you. You can put your shoes on if you want to, leave them on.
Sometimes, as an antidote to fear of death, I eat the stars. Those nights, lying on my back, I suck them from the quenching dark till they are all inside me, pepper hot and sharp. Sometimes instead, I stir myself into a universe still young, still warm as blood. No outer space, just space. The light of all the not yet stars drifting like a bright mist. And all of us, and everything, already there, but unconstrained by form. And sometimes it's enough to lie down here on earth, beside our long ancestral bones, to walk across the cobble fields of our discarded skulls, each like a treasure, like a chrysalis, thinking, whatever left these husks flew off on bright wings.
I invite you now to lie down here on earth, or to sit comfortably with shoes on or off, wherever you are and however your body needs at this moment, as we settle into a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer, beginning with silence shared within this sanctuary and beyond, as we live and breathe on this living and breathing planet. Great mystery which grounds us and surrounds us. Divine presence known by many names and in many ways. Spirit of life, Spirit of earth, Mother Gaia. May our awareness in this hour turn to you on this day of reverence and care for the earth, and on every day of our lives. May we cultivate the tenacious awareness of our deep interconnectedness, our deep belonging and participation in this planet, our interconnectedness in the air that we breathe, and the surface of the earth that we tread upon, and the water that we drink, and the food that we eat. May we be aware of our interconnectedness. In moments of stretching and growth, of swaying like trees, in moments of pain and despair, in moments of deepest gratitude, in our very bones and flesh, may we cultivate this awareness. For we are and have been alive and on and within this earth, born of stardust, born of the primordial soup, born of fathomless generations, cousin and kin to each and every living thing on this sacred biosphere, traveling through space and light and time. In reverence for this interdependent being that we are each but a small constituent of, may we hold in our hearts all the beings suffering and changing, all the systems of life suffering and changing in this great turning, in this time that we are alive. For the fires that burn, for the waters that rise, for the virus that rages, for the wars of humans that do not yield, for the violence of guns perpetrated both by lone actors and by agents of the state, for the storms that brew on the horizon and the calamities which strike unannounced, for heartaches and heartbreaks in our own lives, and for the destruction and dysfunction in our nation, for the hope that rekindles anew within us when we least expect that we can go on. We pray for solace and healing where possible, and where not, we pray for witness and for compassionate adaptation in this great turning. May we hold tight to one another as we weather the coming storms and seek the ways to be good neighbors, good participants on earth, and good ancestors for the generations to come. May it be so. Blessed be. Let us now enter into ritual to bring what is heaviest on our hearts and on our minds this morning, and to lay it onto the altar of community and spirit, honoring the complexities of life, the grief, the growth, and the gratitudes that are alive in each of us. To honor these online, you are invited to share in the chat, and in the sanctuary, you are invited to arrive at one of the 4 aisle altars to light a candle for your grief, your gratitude, or your growth. May we now share in this ritual of community care. And by the larger love which holds us all always. May you and all that you love be granted deepest peace. May it be so. Blessed be.
I am going to read a poem called Surviving the Elements from one of my favorite books called Why Storms Are Named After People and Bullets Remain Nameless. Some lessons come softly, others burn like wildfire, and these are often the most important lessons because they come so intensely and quickly, but they always present you with a choice. Become engulfed by the flames and burn, then wait to rise. Born anew from the ashes, or transform into the flame. Becoming the fire itself. You can choose to be a fire burning brightly, igniting healing and passion into others, because you survived the very elements that tried to defeat you. Can you love the storm that ruined you? Can a bullet make its way back into a gun? What started all of this blooming?
Each week, members and friends generously contribute to our offering, which helps to sustain and grow our community. This collection supports the work and witness of our church, and each week we give half of this collection to a partner organization working to create a more just and loving world. This week we are sharing the plate collection with the Center for Youth to support the Arnett House, which is their homeless shelter for LGBTQ youth. Up to 40% of homeless youth in America identify as LGBTQ, while only making up 7% of the greater youth population. Many factors contribute to this disparity, including the intersections of homophobia and transphobia, failed systems, family poverty, and abuse. The Arnett House provides emergency shelters, transitional and permanent housing, referrals, advocacy, and more to set the youth that they support on a course for stability and self-sufficiency. The Arnett House was nominated for the Share the Plate by our Welcoming Congregation team, which works to ensure that First Unitarian is a church that intentionally welcomes, is intentionally welcoming and affirming for our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer members and friends. You can give online at donate.rochesterunitarian.org. You can give by Venmo or in the baskets that will be passed around the sanctuary. Please give generously, as the offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, our house is on fire. Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, our house is on fire. We love you, we hear you, we commit to change our ways, not later, but sooner, right now, for your future. Youth can't wait, put out the fire. Women can't wait, put out the fire. Blind can't wait, put out the fire. Our house is on fire. For our children, put out the fire. And their children, put out the fire. And their children, put out the fire. Our house is on fire. For songbirds, for clean air, for the oceans and the blaze. Not later, but soon. on fire. Let bees live, let trees grow. Let the snow fall where it may, not later, but sooner. Right now, for the future. Right now, for the future. Right now, we are here to put out the fire. This is how we put out the fire. Time is now. We put out the fire. Our house is on fire.
Too many electronics. Went to go turn this on, and it was my phone. Perhaps we have taken too much. Here at First Unitarian, we enter into this season with our theme of cultivating wild tenacity. We spend 6 or 7 weeks learning how to hold on, how to practice being wild. It's paradoxical, I know. Here, it is our blooming season, and outside, that's apparent. Inside, it's apparent. But it's also, as Aaliyah said earlier, windy. The wind blows and trees fall, and none of this is nearly as terrifying and menacing as the winds that I grew up with. The Santa Ana winds of Southern California that happen later in the year, not in this season, but in late summer, which is to say October or November. Hot winds blow through Los Angeles. I grew up with them. They feel like a warm hug to me. They remind me of where I come from. But for those not acquainted with that feeling, it is terrifying, as if something evil was in the air, a wind that feels like fire. But I grew up around it. It is a type of storm I know, just like the fires that used to rip through California, that have changed in recent decades. The storms that we know, the storms that we've grown up with, they make their way into our bodies and our souls, our families, and our ways of being. And generally, it means we are more resilient, more capable of dealing with, more comfortable with the things that we're used to. 3 years ago, around this time, I visited this community for the first time, collectively, to be with all of you. And there at the end of April, I looked at the flowering trees and it was snowing. I wasn't used to it, but most of you were. And you said, it'll be fine. And it was, and it has been, for the ways that we thought at the time. But here in Rochester, we know how to deal with snowstorms. I recently had friends move from Los Angeles to Rochester, and this past winter was their first winter. And they complained in early January that the city didn't really know how to plow. And I told them, it hasn't really begun to snow yet. We don't plow until there's at least 3 inches on the ground. And what I failed to mention to them, living in the city as I do, is that nothing really gets plowed below 3 inches. 3 inches always remain on the streets. And come mid-February, when my predictions had come true, they were not terribly happy with me, but they understood. A little bit of experience goes a long way. Colette Battle, a climate activist from the Bayou of Louisiana, she grew up in hurricanes. And she talked about the hurricanes that her people for generations had grappled with. Growing up, it would occasionally mean fear, but for the most part, when the winds started to blow and the seas started to rise, you were surrounded by community, by the 20 or 30 people, the subset of her 51 first cousins who would come over so the aunties could cook everything that was in the fridge, so that they could clean out the freezer and start grilling, and they would eat together, and together they would weather the storm. And she talks about the first few decades of her life being immersed in the annual rhythm of storms that her people knew. But later, watching coverage of Katrina, which in New Orleans was a disaster not so much because of the hurricane, but because of the levees, but was a disaster in other parts of Louisiana because of the storm itself. Remembered watching the coverage from Washington, D.C., and thinking, perhaps I've just been away from home too long. Perhaps I've forgotten the storm that I know. But as the coverage continued and she got more and more nervous, she found herself calling her mom and her aunties and saying, "You have to go." And at first they said, "You've been away from home too long. You just don't remember." But she kept calling, and they realized that this too was not a storm that they knew. And they went. And the land that housed her family for generations, that housed the house that her grandfather built, the land that they as Creole people had owned since before that part of Louisiana was part of the United States, is completely underwater now. She remembered as a law student seeing maps that professors had put up on the wall of land change driven by climate crisis, and remembered this academic study being something that was both terrifying but strange because it seemed to move so fast, and yet nobody else in the classroom seemed to know that that is where the house that she grew up in was. Nobody else in the classroom seemed to know that they were talking about her home. Colette Battle talks about climate catastrophe as crisis, the crisis that it is, but she, like I and like all of us, are faced also with the task collectively as a community of essentially doing today what we did last week over the course of many days, all in one moment. Last week, we celebrated Easter in this congregation, and Easter and a resurrection story happened only after the reality of pain and suffering and death on Friday. And so we know where the pain and the suffering and the death are when it comes to climate change, the reality of a catastrophe playing out around us. Well, that's a look into despair and destruction that most of us can't bear to focus on for too long because it can feel hopeless. But we have to move from Friday to Sunday this week, all in one day. We have to move to from despair and destruction to resurrection. The last 50 years of Earth Day, for most of us, has come with the illusion, a once possible hope, but now illusion, that the world we are trying to save is the world and the lifestyle and the choices that we have always made. And that is not possible. This is the Thursday, the Friday, the Saturday of Holy Week for us. But the message of resurrection last week The message of hope from Easter remains with us. The death of what we once knew, the death of what we once hoped for, is not the end of the story. This story does not end with pain and suffering and despair, or at least that's not all of the story. And hear this gently, my dears. We know, some of us gratefully, that not all of us will live to see the worst of climate crisis. And we know, some of us horrified, that the people we most love in the world, our children and our grandchildren, and the people that we don't yet know but already love, the people in this church, in our neighborhood, the people connected to us, well, they may have to face something worse than what we currently can imagine. But it is not the end of the story. That the world cannot be saved to sustain the same lifestyle and choices, and too much of the past is not the end. Here is the good news. Here in community, here at First Unitarian, here in small pockets that people gather to do powerful things in, we are constantly practicing the tools we will need to survive in a world that is different than the one we had known before. Here in this congregation, there are people working tirelessly to mitigate the worst effects of climate crisis. And their good work is something you can attach your time and energy and money and effort to. And it will take all of us to lead into and live into the world that is newly being created. Colette Battle's home, the one that her ancestors have lived in for generations, is now underwater. And yet all of her 51 cousins are alive. All of her 51 cousins are finding new ways of being, new ways of building community where they are now. I don't mean to suggest it's always been easy, that it's always been fun, but the lessons and the ways of being in community, of creating family, they take that with them. We take that with us. Over the last 2 years, in the context of pandemic, this congregation has leaned into community, checking on each other, calling 1,200 people just to see if folks were okay. Organizing community begins with just checking on people, Ms. Battle tells us. We've practiced feeding each other. We've practiced figuring out where others live and who lives close to each other, so that when somebody needs something, someone else can get it to them. We've practiced gathering as a church, online, in person, outside. We've practiced rising to the moment, being flexible and leaning into what's possible when it's possible, mourning our losses, getting in touch with our grief, and opening to new possibilities. A church takes care of each other. That is an old story, but it is also the new path that we will need moving forward. Here in church and throughout the week, between Sunday to Sunday, as a community, we reflect on the lessons that we've learned here on Sundays, the songs we've sung together, the classes our children have been in, and we use them to reweave who we are and how we want to be in the world. Here in a community of faith, a community of hope, resistance, and memory, we have a chance to rehearse and to clarify how we would like to be as individuals and as a community. So as we think now about what are the things we pass on to the people who will survive the best and the worst of what is to come, the songs that we sing, the stories that we tell, the ways that we find joy and connection with each other. These are the gifts we pass to generations to come. The hope that lives beyond our own living is our spiritual task. So today we gather, and many of us brought bikes to see if they were safe to ride for the summer, and it will be fun and it will be joyful, but it will also be a way to practice if it turns out that gas gets too expensive, gets too scarce, gets more aligned with the reality of being a non-renewable resource that it already is. How might we otherwise come to meet each other? I tell this not as a way to scare you into scarcity, but simply to say the more diverse skills we have as a community, the more we are able to be flexible, to rise to the moment, to adapt. The skills we practice now are old skills. Teaching each other and learning how to repair clothing, to be warm without cranking up the heat, to cool down without cranking up the AC, to cook. These old skills are ones that we can cultivate and practice alongside the new skills of why is coffee and conversation hour a little bit better online than it is in person? Why are people more willing to have deep conversations in small groups there than they are here in person? We're going to practice getting to know our neighbors, practice getting to know what we need and how to get it in a couple of different ways. Practice making music together when there's no power. Practice singing, even if you think you're a bad singer. Practice being in community, because the church is, more than anything else, a place where people take care of each other, a place where people come together to seek beauty and truth and to know that they are not alone. As we gather together each Sunday, let us practice these skills, practice these ways of being together, so that this new world that we continue to unfold around us is one that we are equipped to meet. So I invite you to sing one final song with us today. The words will be up there, the choir will be up there, and I, though I am not allowed, or not a good singer, will be singing loudly. I invite you to do the same.
For a moment, I almost thought you said, I'm not allowed to sing. And I was going to say, no, you saved that one. Speaking of songs we pass on to others, this is one that Reverend Sherry brought to us a couple years ago, and we've sung a couple times. The choir has sung it, but it may be more or less familiar. So I invite you to rise in voice, body, and spirit one last time, and let's sing together, We Shall Be Known.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change and life from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Oh, I gotta remember not to do the harmony. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. You got it? Now I'm going to encourage you, as you are willing and able,
to be like the trees, planted, but swaying and flexible, and maybe even a little clappy, little happy, little snappy something. Yeah, maybe some organic harmonies going on. Let's try that again. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now. And what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Listen to those harmonies. Be still my heart.
I think it's so nice that you say it's harmony when I'm singing off key. I feel really supported. Here in community, we love and support each other. We love and lead and unify. And so I'm going to ask you to read our unison words as we extinguish our chalice. And Aaliyah, or Reverend AJ, he was on the move. He was ready. He was like, wait a minute, we talked about tending the fires. I am on it. Join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We carry in our hearts new ways of being, new ways unfolding all around us. May we learn the old skills, ways of being in community, of being interdependent, of being woven together, the lessons of our grandparents, so that we might pass it on to our grandchildren. May we thrive, and may we be known by the company we keep. Amen. Go in peace.